So I want to introduce Tarus from AWS, and Ron, you've seen him bunch on stage already, and they'll have a chat about binary cache and AWS. So,
thank you, Sylvan.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Again, we're super excited to be here. And I'm in somewhat disbelief that I'm actually going to be talking to at NixCon with AWS open source here with me on stage in Switzerland. Yeah. Tarus, maybe you give us like a quick intro.
So as Ron said, I work at Amazon Web Services. When I say AWS, show of hands, how many people think immediately open source?
By the way, for those looking at home, there's like half a hand that went.
Yeah, I saw this. Yeah, I got 1.5 hands, and basically my role is to improve that perception. AWS we consume a lot of open source, and we haven't necessarily been the best at giving back to the community. One story I like to tell is I grew up in the rural South in the United States of America, and culturally, we were pretty insulated. And the first ethnic restaurant we got, I don't count pizza. Pizza isn't like Italian cuisine. We got a Chinese restaurant called the Bamboo Garden. And every Sunday, the Bamboo Garden would have this buffet. And the entire town, we'd go to church, and then we all go to this restaurant. And one of the things they had on the buffet were snow crab legs, which is kind of a pricey piece of food to have it on a buffet. And there was this one guy who would take his plate and he would fill it. He'd take all of it. He'd take all the crab. Even though there were people in line, and he'd sit down and he'd eat like 1 pound or 2 pounds of crab, and then go back and get more. Now, by the rules of all-you-could-eat buffet, he was perfectly within his rights. But there was this unwritten social contract that's not what you did. You leave a few, you share. And one of the things when I started working at AWS was trying to understand that people who did not grow up in an open source community, did not grow up in an open source environment, all they did is look at the license. And they'd say, this is Apache 2.0. I can do whatever I want to with it, as long as I maintain the copyright. And I'm like, yes, but there's this contract that comes with using open source software. And one of the things my group does is we work very hard within AWS to change that perception inside the company that, hey, when we consume open source, we need to give back. And the other thing that we do is Amazon has a lot of resources. And in my group, we can do things like assign credits, where we can give open source communities the ability to use Amazon resources. And we're very excited about Nix. Now, I am a Nix newbie. Like, I can spell Nix, and I've learned more in the last 4 hours than I knew long before I came here. And but one of the things is we're excited about what Nix brings to the table. We're excited about this community, and that's why we sponsored the Nix Cache. And so we, as I saw here, I didn't realize it was 0.5 petabyte, but apparently it's quite large. So
don't worry about it. It's totally managed. It's fine, guys.
So that's why I'm here. I'm basically here. I want to learn more about the Nix community. I want to learn more about how AWS can work tighter with the Nix community and how we can help, how we can give back.
So I guess just to kind of follow that thread, what even made you interested in Nix initially? Was there something specific? Like, what brought you here?
Well, one of the issues that we find out with open source becoming kind of ubiquitous is this idea of lineage, of provenance. When there is an issue, how do we determine what services? So prior to, I've been at AWS a little over 3 years, and prior to that, for 20 years, I ran an open source company called OpenNMS. You've probably never heard of it. It was an open source network monitoring tool. It was a huge monolithic Java application, and we consumed about 400 to 500 Java libraries. I mean, it was big. But the problem is when you have that many libraries, there's always CVEs, there's always issues coming up, and we had to figure out, what versions are we using? And we used Maven as a build environment, and it just depended on what day you ran the build, what version you got. And so one of the things that's very nice now is that we have this idea of having the accountability of being able to quickly make things secure for our customers. And that's one of the things we like about Nix, is this ability to know exactly what the bits are, for lack of a better phrase.
That's amazing. And I guess going from there, obviously, I don't know if everyone's familiar with the S3 cache story, but a few years ago, we, as part of what I was talking about this morning regarding sustainability, we were exploring, what external reliances do we have? And one of those areas was someone external was paying for the S3 cache for almost 13 years. And that was a company called Logic Blocks, and later it was acquired by a company called Infor. And they needed to sunset that support after 13 years. And we made a call to action. We were like, okay, this thing, is costing us not significant amount of money, and funding and sponsorship was not there yet, obviously. So we had a call out to the community and just for help, right? And a lot of the ecosystem and the community actually came together. And I remember it being like a multi-week sprint where everyone was throwing in ideas and garbage collection and deduping and cold storage, and the community was really sprinting around how do we solve this problem of the cache. And I think I remember getting a message on Matrix, out of all places, from Dave Nally. Yeah. And I think now he's the head of developer experience at AWS. And Dave goes, hey, can we just help you in the community with that? And I think you and the team, Spot, Mila, Dave, and yourself kind of swooped in, were like, hey, how can we help? And one of the foundations back then, like what we were looking at is like, how can we have a fix for an amount of time so the community can also rally behind long-term S3 solutions and start optimizing it and thinking about it, and not just trying to be quick. And I think that was immensely appreciated. And what ended up happening is, year over year, you guys are coming back and you're like, hey, let's do it again.
Well, we really appreciate you actually using the credits that we give you, because
we know how to do that pretty well.
Well, yeah. You won't understand. So anybody who has an open source project, you can Google AWS open source credits, and there's a form you fill out, and you email it to us, and we'll evaluate it. Now, the one thing that you may not realize with us supporting the cache is one of the reasons we do it is because our customers are using Nix. This definitely does help our customers out. We're very, very, very happy about that. But I remember once receiving, I don't manage the credits program, my coworker Mila does, but I'm on the mailing list, and there was someone had asked for $10,000 in credits. And she replied says, hi, we noticed that you asked to renew $10,000 in credits. In the last year, you've used 23 cents. And it was just like, so we really do like the fact that you use this stuff, because it does reflect on us. If we give credits out that don't get used, then the program gets examined, and what decision makers. So just keep using the credits. That's kind of cool.
Okay, good to know. And then I would assume, so that sounds super exciting. Are there things that as an ecosystem, as a community, right, all of us here are working in different places, thinking about different projects, is there some things that we can think about next year that can be helpful or useful for your team?
We really want to know how we can make AWS a more friendly environment for NixOS users. I've heard two things since I've been here. One is to make the cache easier when you bring up an EC2 instance. So you bring up an EC2 instance, can you bring it up so that NixOS is already there and already configured with access to the cache? Over lunch, I had a really good conversation, and one of the things that's big now is AWS Lambda, which is kind of our serverless environment. And the idea was to have a Nix layer when you call a Lambda function, so you don't have to build that yourself. That the Nix environment is just available in Lambda. So what I'm interested in is if you see me around, I'll be around all weekend. If you see me around and you have some ideas for how AWS can make it easier. So when I ran OpenMS, we struggled with how do you make money as an open source company? And after trying everything, we did support, we did subscriptions, we did everything but open core. I don't like open core, I like open source. It came down to three things. People will pay for three things when it comes to open source. They'll pay for simplicity, they'll pay for security, and they'll pay for stability. And that's kind of where one of the most successful services at AWS is RDS, which is our relational database system. You can run MySQL, MariaDB, you can run Postgres on Amazon, and we abstract a lot of the difficulty out of it. We make it simpler to use, and we make it more secure and more stable. So anyone looking at a business model, those are the three things that we're kind of looking at. And that's kind of where I want to find out, how do we make it more simple, more secure, and more stable to run NixOS on AWS?
So I think I can speak for a lot of folks in the room, obviously being super appreciative. And this was a very proactive, effort from the AWS team and your team. What's your advice as we're starting to look, right? Just this morning, we were talking about how we want to be more open to collaborating and having contributors come in from organizations or larger companies. Like, what's your advice to us? Like, how can we do better there?
I honestly think I don't have any hard advice because it's a difficult problem. It's not something that one size fits all. But just watching the growth of this community, I mean, you're 100 people more than you were last year. That's a 33% increase. You're doing a lot of the right things. And one of the things that I can do within AWS, as a technical person, it's very weird to me to report to marketing, but I'm actually in the marketing organization. And we do have this ability to do outreach. And even here, I've thought about 3 or 4 blog posts I want to do around Nix to get this in front of enterprise customers, to get it in front of people who just don't know it exists. The number one request I get from any kind of startup is not actually credits. It's always, how can I make the millions of people who use AWS aware my product exists? Because there's a really good story here in NixOS. And I think that, I've often said the best things in open source usually have the steepest learning curves. I mean, just understanding, on Wikipedia, there's a Nix page and there's a NixOS page, but there's only one website. And so it's kind of hard. Oh, it's a package manager. Oh, it's an operating system. Oh, it's, getting that story out and trying to make people aware of the value, I think, is something that AWS can do.
Got it. And also, I'll tell the crowd, if folks do have questions, we can turn this into semi-interactive, depending on the time that we have. Yeah. So if you have a question, raise your hand. I'll be happy to repeat it. But yeah, and Sylvan can be with a mic. So think about that.
Well, while we wait for the first question, I want to know 2 things about you. First of all, how did you get involved in Nix? Because my favorite thing of all the superhero stories is the origin story. So what's your Nix origin story?
Yeah, I was thinking I was going to be interviewing you.
I want to get that back.
Nix origin. So I was in before this I was running Meta Developer Products, and those teams and those organizations was doing a platform to pretty much replicate Linux, like replicate a toolchain on Linux. Starting to have to deal with all the works on my machine, Linux, Mac, let's say complexity, and we rebuilt everything from scratch. And then I found Nix. And I think for me, the first stepping stone to Nix was that genuinely there's a crown jewel in it. And that's the concept that 23 years ago, right, Ilko came and said, like, hey, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't know where Ilko here is in the crowd, but at the end of the day, paraphrasing, it's like, what if, software complexity is an order-end problem? What if we had an order-end solution for it, right? What if we could actually come and say that the entire baseline infrastructure for software is a common architecture? And I would say that's wild, because how do you do that? You need the entire supply chain to also be a common architecture. And I think, this community over 20 years was able to build the critical mass that it needed to be, and that's Nix packages, and that's where the cache comes in, to actually create most of the software universe that is needed to create a common architecture across the ecosystem. And I think that's the magic of it. And that's what really got me excited about the potential for Nix and how it can change the way we foundationally do software in the industry.
Well, I can just tell from the short time I've been here, the energy coming from this community is really, really solid. And it's great to see. I spend a lot of time now in what I call corporate open source, and I really miss this. It's like I've just really had a fun time with the conversations and the hallway track. So,
Do you have some examples of like other open source projects that you've been working with or are excited about?
One of the ones that I've managed to fund a lot of. Does anyone here know a man named Chris DeBona? He was head of open source at Google for many years. He once quipped that his job was to give money to his friends. And I really took that to heart. And one of the databases that we use at AWS that I don't think gets the credit it deserves is MariaDB. And so I was able to convince MariaDB to Amazon to become the very first diamond sponsor of the MariaDB Foundation. Wow. And it's 500,000 euros a year. Which is funny because at AWS, we were a document-driven culture. Like when I signed up, my boss says, you won't need PowerPoint. Like everything's done in documents. And so I gave my first presentation, the first official document I ever wrote, I presented to a vice president. And the vice president said, good doc, I'm not aligned. He basically, which not being aligned is very bad at AWS. And I wore him down. It took me 2 months, but I convinced him that this is something we needed to do. And there's a lot of really interesting things. My role right now is we are trying to reach out to startups pre-funding. Okay. And the idea is how can we identify these startups and give them a leg up and get them started. I would like, this is not official anywhere, but my personal goal is to make AWS the place to run open source workloads. And I don't know if I'll succeed at it, but that's my goal. And so that's kind of where I'm always interested in. So if you got a startup idea, let me know.
So on the startup point, is that mainly open source startups? Is that
open source startups? I specifically, it's kind of difficult. It's hard to find. There's not many companies that do what I would call pure open source, commercial open source. Percona comes to mind. I work a lot with Percona. And all of the tools Percona provides are available under open source licenses. They also have, of course, hosted services. To me, my dream is that if you embrace that simplicity, security, and stability, the idea is that you have a hosted instance of something, but you have the exit button. And you press the exit button and you get all your configuration, all your database, and you can run it on-prem. And there's no loss of functionality, there's no loss of features. I used to use WordPress as an example, but for reasons I don't do that anymore. But the idea was, they had what was called a 5-minute install. And I could, bring up your server, go drop a tarball on a web root, go to a web page, add a database user, 5 minutes, take me 3.5. I ran a lot of WordPress instances. But if you didn't have a server and you didn't understand the command line and you didn't want to deal with all that, you could go to WordPress.com. And for $5 a month, $10 a month, or whatever, they'd host it. But the option was always there where you could exit out and run it on-prem. And that to me is pure open source. But I deal with the fact that a lot of people have this idea where there will be something that isn't purely open source. And I'm okay with that. But I am for anything that generates more open source software because I think it really does bring the freedom outside of the vendor and back to the user. Zoe from the Free Software Foundation kept talking about the word freedom, and I really think that's important, especially in today's society.
So if no one's going to ask a question, I'm actually going to broach the AI subject. Just going to put that out there. All right, we're going to hit it. So open source and AI. I'm just going to raise it, and I want to. I'm showing you the Rorschach picture.
So open source AI. I mean, the thing is, AI is not source code, and so trying to provide this idea of open source to something that's not source code is difficult. But I am of the belief that back in the Ubuntu days, when they handed out these things called CDs, I'm old, does anyone remember CDs? You'd go to a conference and they'd hand out CDs, and in there would be like 3 source CDs that had all the source code on it. And I'm like, well, why are you handing out the source code? And they said, what if you're on a desert island and you don't have access to the internet, I have to give you the source code so that you can recreate the software. You can modify it and recreate it. To me, if you have a large language model that does not provide the training data, then you're not open source or free software in any sense of the imagination, because you need this, I'm on a desert island and want to recreate this. Now, I'm just me, I'm not a anybody, and so the open source initiative has come out with their definition, which doesn't include training data. I don't agree with that definition. I was going to ask Zoe, we ran out of time, I was going to ask Zoe if there is a copyleft version. But there are. AI2 is publishing their models as open source. I just read that Switzerland, as of this morning, I'm trying to remember that Switzerland just released a large language model of which 45% of the training data was not in English. It actually has Romansh, is that how you say it? One of the official languages of Switzerland. And that was really exciting to me because they had the training data and the tools you needed to actually do all this. So I do think that open source has a big role to play in AI. And in fact, a lot of when I say AI, everyone thinks large language models, but if you think that it also includes machine learning, we have things like PyTorch that have been instrumental in machine learning, and they're open source. And so I think we have a role, but I think it's going to be a couple of years before we actually can sort out what open source AI actually means.
And I'm gonna switch that around. So how should we be thinking about AI as an open source community? Like, should we be leveraging it? Should we be spending cycles on it? Or where do you think it meets us?
If you can fit the right problem to the right model, I think there's some value. Like, I have a GitHub repo and a GitHub account. And I think I did it in 2016, 2015. It's been around for a while. Yeah. Last fall, I just added my first repository. And it was a piece of code that I wrote using generative AI. And I have two repositories, and the second one I just added like a week ago, and it was something I used generative AI. I had a computer when I was 12, so I've been programming, but it's not something I do very often. I can hack things. So within Nix, where it makes sense, and I think some of the places where it makes sense could be documentation. This idea of how, can you take something and at least get something that a human can go back and edit? Because again, that learning curve, going out and reaching. One of the things I like about this conference is I've seen a lot of people who don't have gray hair like me. And a lot of like the Apache community, there are a lot of these communities that are aging, and we're not able to get. I'm not being sorry. I mean, with age comes wisdom and beauty. But this idea is that we need to get younger people involved and make them see the value of this. And part of that is just welcoming them into the community. And some open source communities can be very toxic, and I've not gotten that at all from Nix, which I think is pretty cool and something you should be very proud of. So I say where it makes sense, but don't overhype it. Yeah. I am, the fact that it's supposed to. I don't want to go. I know we're close to time. But if you go to my blog, you can read me complaining about generative AI and how horrible it is.
So I guess an extension of that in the last 60 seconds that we have left. How can folks work with you? Obviously, through the foundation is one way, but you're here. You're a person. How can they reach out to you? Can they collaborate? Can they grab beers with you tonight? So
yeah, please. If you look at the program and you can find out how to spell my name, Tarus. It's kind of odd. If you Google that, you'll find me all over the internet. And I welcome emails. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. If you reach out to me on LinkedIn, if you could provide a little "I met you" or "heard you at NixCon," because sometimes I get a lot of random conversations. But I'm welcome to, I have a lot to learn. That's why I'm here. I'm here to learn about NixOS. I'm here to learn from you. So let me know what AWS and me in particular can do to help promote this community.
Awesome. Well, Tarus, thank you so much for coming all the way out here.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate y'all. Cheers.